Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me for day 2 of the Spellbinders Crafty Advent Calendar. So if you didn't see day 1 yesterday, I have the Crafty Advent Calendar from Spellbinders, and I'm going to do a little project every day for December up until the 24th using the products from the calendar. Now the calendar is sold out, so you can't get it. Here's day 2, a little tiny stamp set, and it's really, really pretty. So I'm going to make tags, gift cards, just little things to inspire you, some things that you can do with items that you've gotten from your calendar. And if you didn't get one, I'm just going to list and link below the supplies that I use for these projects, but alternatives for the stamp sets or the die sets. And I hear there's embossing folders or whatever. There's a bunch of different things in these calendars, and I just thought it would be fun to play with them and just use them for different things for different projects. I love the fact that the stuff in these calendars are not just holiday themed, so it's not just stuff for Christmas, it's stuff that can be used throughout the year. For this one, I decided to make a small gift card, and I wanted to use my Copic markers to color them. I haven't pulled them out in a while, so I thought it'd be nice to color a nice image. And I'm also going to do some fussy cutting and pop some stuff up. I always love doing a little bit of fussy cutting with simple images and popping things up just to give it a little bit of dimension that it may not already have. So the one on the right there is going to be my card base. The one that I stamped 2 different ones on there, those are going to be the ones that I die cut pieces out of. I'll have all of the supplies and the Copic colors that I'm using listed down and below. I love using Copic markers because they are alcohol based and you can sit and color the same area for hours if you wanted, and it's not going to start to peel the paper. Dye-based markers peel the paper really, really fast, whereas Copic markers, you can really get in there and do some nice blending with it. You can tweak it and alter it, and if you don't like the blending the first time, you can go back and go over it. I'm just using hammer mill cardstock here. It's really nice for Copic blending. I love using 2 to 3 colors that are very similar to do the blending. When you're starting out, 2 colors is nice because it's a little bit less overwhelming, and I've even seen people use as many as 4 or 5 colors to get some really deep blends in there. I typically max out at 3. It all depends really on the size of your image as well. These are really, really tiny, so even 3 is pushing it. There's not a lot of area for those 3 different colors. So some of those areas I'm just going to do 2, some I will do 3. And there's some here, this blue, when I go and do the 3rd color, I realize that it's really not much different from my 2nd color. So when I go to do the extra pieces that I'm going to be cutting out, I'm only using 2 of them. Some of these areas are so small that there's just no point in doing that extra little bit. When I'm coloring with Copics, I go with my light color, then I go in with my medium color if I'm using 3, and then I go in with my dark color, and then I go back from dark to light, and then finish it off with the light color as well. It usually takes a little while for those colors to completely dry, so you'll notice that the color continues to blend as it dries. So if you don't like it immediately when you're coloring, don't worry about it. It's going to continue to blend as it dries. The other thing too is because this paper doesn't peel with the alcohol-based markers, you can go back in and you can tweak it, you can adjust it, you can add more shading to it if you want. These 2nd and 3rd images, I'm only coloring the pieces that I'm going to actually be cutting out. I'm not coloring any of the images that I'm cutting out. So the greenery from this little floral here is going to stay flat. I'm not going to cut that part out. I'm only cutting out the flowers to give them a little bit of extra dimension. And some of those areas are going to have 2 layers and some are going to have 3 layers. So these blue flowers here, I'm going to do 3 layers for them so you can see that I'm coloring all 3 layers. The pink flower that I'm going to be doing and the purple one are only going to be 2 layers. So I'm only going to color those twice. Now when I'm doing these images where I pop up, I like to color the images below them. I don't like seeing a blank outlined image underneath it. So I color all 3 of them and then I cut them out afterwards so that when you're seeing it a little bit tilted to the side, you still see some color. That's a personal preference. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. I like being able to see that little bit of color there. Often when I'm doing this, I will have 3 complete images, and I will just pick and choose the best parts, or the parts that I like most from the different layers, to pick and choose what to color. The other thing is I'm using Copics here. If you wanted to use a dye-based marker, you could absolutely do that. If you wanted to use a permanent ink and then watercolor and then die cut or cut these out and pop them up, that also works as well. This image is very versatile and you can use it for so many different things. This is a floral image. It doesn't even need to be a floral image. If you wanted to try the different techniques out, you can pick and choose what you want to do. That's the nice thing about crafting, is if someone is doing something that you don't necessarily love, or you don't want to do it that way, you don't have to. So I've got my pink here. I've already colored the purple one. I did the purple one with 3 colors because I could see that depth and dimension. For the pink one, I'm only doing 2 colors. My second color was really close to one of the other ones, so it was going to be a waste of time. So I put the lightest color in there. You can see there's quite a bit of difference between my light color and my dark color here. I didn't really have a color that was in between that I liked with them, so I just left it with the light and the dark color. So I went in, colored the entire rose or flower with my light color, put the dark color where that petal went underneath the one below it, and then colored back over again with the light one. For my second image, I decided to change it up a little bit just to see if I could get a little bit more blending. So I'm coloring just a few petals at a time, adding the dark pink and then blending it right away so that that ink doesn't have much time to dry in between it. I really didn't notice much difference in the blending. I thought I would see a little bit more blending this way, but I actually didn't. So you can pick and choose how you want to do it. If you don't want to do each and every petal, or if you don't want to take the time to be going back and forth with your markers, you don't have to. Try it both ways, see which way you like best. There's so many different ways to do things, and one way that works for one person may not work for you. Something else might work for you. That's, again, a nice thing about creating, is you can choose what method works for you. There's so many different ways to do things. So here I have my images all cut out. I am taking one of the squares from the small classic square dies from Spellbinders, and I am die cutting that. That's going to be my image piece for my card. I wanted to take the one of the dies that was a little bit bigger to cut a mat, so I did that at the same time as well. And when I laid my image piece on top of the mat piece, there was too much of a border. I didn't like that really thick border there. If you like it, you can keep it that way, but I really like the look that a die gives when you die cut. So rather than taking out my trimmer and making it smaller, which no one would have seen the difference, it was just a personal preference on my part, I took that same square die, put it in a little bit, and I eyeballed it here. So I'm going to be slightly wider in my mat on one side than on the other side, but that's okay. I did tape it in place to make sure that it didn't shift in my die cutting machine. And now I've got a nice thin border around there. Another way I like to do this sometimes is taking one of the Copic markers that I've used in my image and using the chisel end for it and running the long end of the chisel end along my paper. It's a great way to create a faux mat, and by doing it that way you get a perfect match. The color would be exactly the same as what you colored with. So if you don't happen to have cardstock that works for doing your mat, that might be a good solution for you. I'm taking my cutter bee scissors and I'm fussy cutting the rest of those images, and I'm not going to show you the entire thing because it's kind of boring. But when you're fussy cutting, what I like to do is, you can see that my scissors are angled. I have them angled underneath the image so that that cut is a little bit of a slant and you don't see as much of the white edge of the paper. I have a little card base here. I'm doing a top folding card for this, but you could easily do it side folding. It's a square card, so it's really not going to make a difference which way you have the fold. It's just personal preference. I'm taking a C1 Copic marker, and I like to do just a little bit of a shadow. No, sorry, this is C3. I like to do a little bit of a shadow all the way around my floral image. It's one of those things that you don't necessarily see unless someone points it out. I often will do it either C1 or C3. It just depends on how much you want to be able to see it. C3 is a darker gray, so you'll be able to see it a little bit more than C1. But it's one of those things that almost puts a faux shadow on there. So it pops the image out a little bit. And like I said, it's something that people don't actually see it until you point it out to them. I've done this for many years, and it's one thing that I've pointed out to people every once in a while, and they're like, oh, I didn't even notice. So it's a great way to add some faux dimension because, like I said, it puts a bit of a shadow underneath there, but you don't actually really see that color on there. And especially on video, you see it even less. So with that drying, I'm going to take some foam strips. You could use foam pop dots here. The ones that I have are a little bit too thick for what I wanted. Because this image is so tiny, I didn't want to have really thick foam pop dots. These strips that I had here are thinner, so I was going to get the same dimension, but it wasn't going to be quite as thick. So by putting them on the back, I'm just putting strips of them there just to make sure that everything is supported. And for this particular image, I have all of those flowers cut out as one cluster, and I'm just going to add it to that. And you can see that I have my blue flowers, the one that's going to have 3 layers. I have those cut out individually. So I'm going to use my fingers to add a little bit of extra dimension to them. For this one here, because that petal goes underneath the pink flower, I have that part glued down flat, and then I just have the other petals raised up. For the other ones, I'm just going to pinch those petals up and just glue down the center so that it gives it basically those flowers are not flat. It has a little bit more dimension, and those flowers look a little bit more realistic. My last touch here, and I'm doing this while my Distress Collage medium is wet. You could wait till it's dry. I'm just adding a few dots in the center of those flowers just to add a touch of sparkle. Once I let that completely dry, here is the finished card. It's very simple, but it's very sweet. I love this image. It's such a cute one. Thank you so much for joining me for day 2 of the Crafty Advent Calendar. I appreciate you being here. See you tomorrow for day 3.